Get Portrush a skatepark. It feels like an ancient and defiant battle cry reverberating down the years, down the generations. I can remember the town hall meetings a lifetime ago, the fundraising skate jams, the slapdash youth skate projects, and the DIY parks built in abandoned warehouses or on disused scrapes of land. We were told by the older skaters that the petitioning, the lobbying, and the fundraising my generation was busying ourselves with in 2000 was the latest wave in a long standing plea for a local facility, ignored in their time and ignored in ours. And here we are, 20 years later, Portrush and the Triangle's reputation as a dynamic home for skate, surf, and alternative culture is more prevalent than ever, and yet Portrush still has no public skate park. As the province's list of skate park furnished towns expands with every year, and the rest of the island's skaters are catered for further still, Portrush, with its large, vibrant, and historic scene, remains a shamefully skatepark free zone. As part of that early 2000s skate wave, we descended on the town every weekend to pop the hours away in and around the amphitheatre or at the now deeply appreciated and sorely missed Portrush Youth Centre. Whilst this explosion of skaters was evident in every corner of the land, Portrush already had a history and a tie with skate culture through surfing, which was rich and uncommon. But as we would learn over the years through both skateboarding and through playing music, this rich culture has, at best, been completely ignored or at worst, been actively suppressed by the local establishment. Far from nourishing the idiosyncrasies and promoting the area based on its uniqueness, its youthfulness, or its divergent cultures like they do in other places, time, effort, and money has gone into discouraging or burying any expression that doesn't quite fit with the golf resort, slick apartment, cocktail bar version of the North Coast. At least that's how it always felt. The same could be said for the musical tradition we were part of, flourishing DIY scenes that ran in tandem with skateboarding. And whilst there were some who supported and encouraged the emerging punk and hip hop scenes, the Atlantic Bar in particular, it always felt like successive councils or local politicians were genuinely active in obstructing the creative endeavours of the area's youth. The list of small festivals or all ages shows that were shut down rather than helped or pulled up is endless. Local artists that have been successful and embraced across the world have often felt it necessary to move away from the North Coast. To me, it's because of this relationship or lack of with the local leadership that perpetuated this. Don't get me wrong, part of the vitality of those scenes was their sense of marginalisation and that cliched feeling of outcasts and weirdos making it happen on their own terms. But surely there must be some middle ground in the 2020s when we can see starkly how legitimate our youth and art cultures are. In August, I invited the Portrush skate scene to partner with my DIY all-dayer coaster and organise some sort of free skate jam in Station Square ahead of the music at the Atlantic that night. The ball was in their court, as much or as little involvement as they were comfortable with. Arriving in the town before soundcheck, I was astonished by the turnout and by the mobilisation of the scene. Ramps, rails, music, local food trucks, and of crucial importance, an activist stand with petitions and information around the campaign for a park. The sheer number of skaters was impressive, the range of ages and genders was more diverse than ever, and one thing that struck me was the spectators. In their hundreds sat parents, families, tourists, locals alike, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Like no time in my memory has the support for the skate scene by non-skaters been so evident, appreciating how this culture that exists in the town is rich, important, and makes the place more interesting. Gone are the outdated characterizations of skaters as mindless troublemakers, and as signatures were collected on skatepark petitions, it seemed clear that the locals were behind the push. And yet campaigners for the park speak with exasperation about the hurdles council workers have been putting in front of the move for a park. It's hard to watch bowling greens, town landscaping and outdoor exercise equipment being installed left, right and centre, seemingly without struggle, whilst the area still has no urban sports facility. That's in no way to do down those activities, but the sheer number of young people skateboarding at Station Square every week, and the Amphi for generations before that, is surely proof enough that a park is more prescient. It feels as though there are some powerful actors involved who still harbour those outdated parochial views of skaters being vandals and thugs. While speaking as someone who interacts with the scene regularly, it's as responsible, supportive and conscientious a space as you're likely to find. Occasionally in the early 2000s, homemade skate obstacles would be confiscated, which was always worse than being ignored by the then Coleraine Council. But in a painfully out-of-touch move, the current council removed a treasure trove of ramps and rails from Station Square a couple of weekends after Coaster as a handful of child skaters and their parents looked on perplexed. You could almost understand the removal in our day when the obstacles were more ad hoc and the scene not as large and cohesive as it is now. But to remove cherished equipment used by young and old, the flourishing skate school, and the next wave of sponsored kids just seems downright mean spirited. How can you not provide public facilities for so long for such a popular activity and then go ahead and remove any trace of the humble efforts that people have gone to in providing those facilities for themselves? After 20 plus years of campaigning for a park, to have their ramps removed in such a way was like salt in the wounds. And based on public outcry online, the ramps were returned, and those responsible were forced to at last consider the optics. Now, with Station Square officially allocated as an urban sports plaza for a year, and a new recreation ground on Moorhead being created with some small provision for the scene, it is fair to celebrate little victories when we can, but to me these gestures could be seen as a sticking plaster, and the scene would be wise to keep the pressure on for a more major facility. For so many years it felt as though local politicians were just waiting for the fad to die off, and I could be forgiven for imagining that that is what's happening here. I have written many articles now on my passion for this North Coast alternative spirit, something I've borne witness to for all of my adult life. I have travelled the world, and I truly believe the North Coast punches far above its class in the artistic and the unconventional. The stark tragedy is that generations of young people within these unorthodox cultures have been wholly discouraged and underappreciated, if not downright demonised. It's only with years to reflect that you start to wonder if this demonisation might be linked to the appalling levels of mental health issues, drug use and suicide rates among my peers. It's not a stretch to suggest that watching the well-supported youth football events, the raft race, or the beloved golf programmes exalted and encouraged ad infinitum may have taken its toll on countless talented but forgotten young people. As the Atlantic Bar now faces closure, calls for its preservation unheeded, it feels as though we stand at a crossroads. One last beacon of character and colour in the town is being erased, but could it be replaced by another in the form of a skatepark? In what is beginning to feel like the rolling credits of a long, taxing movie, we'll grasp towards any shreds of optimism and dream that the void left by the Atlantic might just be filled. We implore, we beg, we scream. Get Portrush a skatepark. Give Portrush a skatepark.